I was standing in my grandmother's driveway at 2:47 in the morning, watching my mother carry a cardboard box out of the house my grandmother had died in less than 4 hours earlier, and the box had my grandmother's wedding china in it. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 6 years, I've worked as a hospice nurse outside Savannah, Georgia. I have held the hands of strangers while they took their last breaths. I have called their children in the middle of the night and said the words nobody wants to hear. I thought I understood grief better than almost anyone I knew. I did not understand until that night how fast grief can turn into greed inside people who are supposed to love you. The call came at 2:13 a.m. It was Gloria Whitaker, my grandmother Evelyn's neighbor for almost 30 years, and her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her at first. "Claire, honey, it's Evelyn," she said. "She's gone. She passed in her sleep. I'm so sorry." I sat up in bed in the dark, and I felt the floor tilt underneath me even though I was lying down. Evelyn Bennett was not just my grandmother. She was the only person in my family who had ever loved me without sending me a bill for it. Then Gloria said something that made my stomach drop even further. "Claire, I have to tell you something else. Your parents are already there. I saw their car in the driveway when the ambulance came. They didn't call you. I did." I threw on clothes and drove the 6 miles to Evelyn's house so fast I don't remember most of the drive. I remember gripping the wheel and telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they were there to help. Maybe grief made them go straight to her instead of calling me first. I wanted so badly to believe that. I pulled into the driveway and saw my mother, Marissa, carrying a cardboard box out the front door in her bathrobe, like she had rushed over the moment she heard. Except she wasn't crying. She wasn't wiping her eyes. She was moving efficiently, the way she moved through everything in her life, like a woman completing a task. "Mom," I said, standing in the driveway, my voice cracking, "what are you doing? She just died." My mother looked at me, and there was no grief on her face at all. It was something closer to satisfaction. "You're too late, sweetheart. We've already started sorting everything." I want you to understand something before I go further into this story. My mother did not become this way overnight. This was not shock talking or grief making her say something she didn't mean. This was who she had always been. I just hadn't let myself see it clearly until that moment in the driveway. To understand how we got to that driveway, you have to understand how I grew up. My mother kept a black accordion folder in the hallway closet labeled Family Expenses. Inside it were receipts, my orthodontist bills, my school field trip fees, the cost of the used Honda I drove in high school. Every single dollar spent on me since the day I was born, itemized and dated, like I was a loan she expected to collect on someday. If I ever asked for something, even something small, she would remind me, "Nothing is free, Claire. Remember that." My father, Thomas, was not cruel the way my mother was. He was just quiet. He would sit at the dinner table while my mother said things that made my chest ache, and he would look down at his plate and say nothing. I have since learned that silence, when you have the power to stop something and choose not to, is its own kind of cruelty. It just wears a gentler face. The one place I could breathe was 6 streets away, in my grandmother Evelyn's kitchen. Evelyn had run a small antique and textile shop in downtown Savannah for almost 40 years before she retired. Her house smelled like cedar and old paper and cinnamon, and she never once asked me what I owed her. When I would ask, out of habit, what I owed her for a ride to school or a meal or a new pair of shoes, she would set down whatever she was doing, look right at me, and say the same thing every time. The only thing you owe someone who loves you is to love somebody else someday. I grew up caught between two completely different definitions of family. My parents believed love was a transaction that eventually had to be repaid. Evelyn believed love was something you were supposed to set free into the world, not collect on. When I was 17, Evelyn fell in her garden and broke her hip. While she was recovering, my mother suddenly became very interested in things she had never cared about before. Evelyn's bank accounts, the deed to the house, the commercial building Evelyn still owned downtown. My mother started showing up with documents for Evelyn to sign, papers about power of attorney, she called it. Evelyn refused every single one. I remember overhearing my parents in the kitchen one night talking in low voices about how they could get control of Evelyn's finances before she does something foolish with it. I was young, but I understood exactly what they meant. Evelyn wasn't foolish, she just wasn't going to hand her life over to people who only started paying attention to her once she got hurt. Evelyn wasn't foolish about my parents either. She quietly called her longtime attorney a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Judith Mercer, and she started writing things down. Dates, conversations, every attempt my mother made to pressure her. I didn't know it at the time, but that was the beginning of something my parents would not understand the full weight of for another 11 years. 2 weeks after I turned 18, I came home from my shift at the diner where I worked part-time and found 3 cardboard boxes sitting by the front door. My clothes, my books, everything I owned in the world, packed up like I was already gone. My mother stood in the doorway and said, "You're an adult now. If you're choosing Evelyn's side, you can build your life with her." There was no yelling, no fight, just the door closing, quietly. Like I had never lived there at all. I slept in my car that night in a grocery store parking lot because I was too ashamed to call anyone and admit what had happened. I remember staring at the ceiling of my Honda, telling myself I would be fine, that I didn't need them, even while every part of me was terrified. The next morning, Evelyn found me. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She just reached into her cardigan pocket and pressed an old brass key with a strip of blue nail polish on the top into my hand. "As long as I have a door," she said, "you have a place behind it." I kept that key on my keychain for the next 11 years. I won't pretend the years after that were easy. I worked double shifts at the diner, took night classes, became an EMT, and eventually earned my nursing degree, finding my way into hospice care, where I learned to sit with people in the hardest moments of their lives without asking anything in return. It was work that kept teaching me the same lesson Evelyn had taught me my whole childhood. Love doesn't send an invoice. I never fully healed from being thrown away by my own parents. I told myself I didn't need anyone. The blue key stayed on my keychain the whole time, a small, quiet reminder that somebody, at least, had never made me feel like a debt. In the last 2 years of her life, Evelyn started meeting privately and often with Judith Mercer. I assumed it was ordinary paperwork, the kind of thing people do as they get older. I had no idea she was quietly building a wall around everything she owned, one document at a time, specifically designed to survive an attack she somehow already knew was coming. Months before her final diagnosis, she created a new trust and named me the primary beneficiary, with protections built in that would make it very difficult for anyone to challenge. She knew exactly who her daughter was. She had known for years. Evelyn died peacefully in her sleep. I wasn't there, and by the time I arrived at her house that night, my parents were already inside, going through closets, pulling folders out of drawers, sorting through 60 years of my grandmother's life like they were closing out a store at the end of a shift. A week later, in Judith Mercer's office, I learned what Evelyn had actually left behind. The historic house, a commercial property downtown, investment accounts, cash, and personal belongings. Altogether, it came to almost $2.8 million, and I was the primary beneficiary of nearly all of it. My mother's face went white, and then it hardened into something I recognized instantly because I had seen it my entire childhood. It was the look she got when a plan wasn't going the way she needed it to. "Claire can't possibly manage all of this alone," she said to Judith, as if I weren't sitting right there. "Evelyn would have wanted the family to handle this together." I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I said no to her without flinching. A week later, Marissa showed up at my apartment with a professionally printed document titled the Bennett Family Preservation Agreement. She told Evelyn had wanted the family properties kept together, managed jointly for the good of everyone. Buried in the fine print was a clause handing control of the entire estate to her and my father. I refused to sign it. When I brought the document to Judith, her face changed as she read it. "Claire," she said carefully, "your grandmother never created this agreement. I drafted every document she signed in the last 5 years of her life. This isn't hers." That was the moment I understood my parents weren't just trying to inherit money. They were trying to manufacture a claim to control, using a document with my dead grandmother's name attached to something she had never seen. When I still refused to hand anything over, my parents took it to court. They claimed Evelyn had been manipulated in her final years, not by a stranger, by me. They argued that I had used my position as her granddaughter and as a nurse to influence a vulnerable, aging woman into changing her estate in my favor, as if loving her had been a strategy. Then it got worse. When the probate case didn't move quickly in their favor, my parents filed a formal complaint connected to my nursing license, suggesting my professional access to elderly patients proved I was capable of manipulating my own grandmother. Suddenly, I wasn't only fighting to protect Evelyn's wishes, I was fighting to protect the career I had built entirely on my own, with no help from either of them. Then came the offer. $600,000, and my parents would drop the probate challenge and quietly withdraw the license complaint if I signed a confidentiality agreement promising never to speak about any of it again. I sat with that offer for 3 days, exhausted in a way that wasn't about sleep, terrified of losing the career I had clawed my way into. $600,000 felt, for one weak moment, like a way to make the entire nightmare disappear. I had the papers in front of me, pen in hand, the night Gloria Whitaker knocked on my door. She sat across from me at my kitchen table and took my hand. "Your grandmother wasn't surprised by any of this, Claire," she said. "She spent years preparing for exactly this moment. She didn't leave you that money so they could still find a way to control you. She left you choices. Don't hand one of your only real choices back to them." I looked down at the settlement agreement, and for the first time I understood what signing it actually meant. It wasn't freedom. It was just another form of control dressed up as a check. I tore it in half. The probate hearing took place on a gray Tuesday morning in a Savannah courthouse that smelled like old wood and coffee. My mother sat with her attorney, composed, dressed like she was attending a fundraiser, playing the role of the devoted mother who only wanted to protect her family's legacy. I was painted as the calculating granddaughter who had gotten too close, too involved in an old woman's final years. But piece by piece, my attorney took the story apart. Evelyn's doctor testified she remained sharp and mentally competent until the end. Her bank manager confirmed she handled her own finances independently, without my involvement. A local realtor testified, almost reluctantly, that my mother had approached him years earlier asking about selling Evelyn's property, long before Evelyn was even sick. My hospice coworker confirmed I had never once made a single medical decision on my grandmother's behalf. Then it was my turn. I sat in that witness chair, and for the first time in my life, I told strangers everything I had spent years hiding. I told them about being packed into 3 cardboard boxes at 18. I told them about sleeping in my car in a grocery store parking lot. I told them about the blue key and what it meant to be told there would always be a door for me by the one person in my family who never once made me feel like a debt. And then I looked directly at my mother and I said the words I had been carrying for 11 years. My grandmother didn't make me her beneficiary because I convinced her of anything. She made me her beneficiary because she had already decided, a long time ago, who she trusted. The courtroom went completely silent. Then Judith Mercer stood and told the judge there was one more piece of evidence. Years earlier, Evelyn had prepared a sealed letter to be opened only if her trust was ever formally challenged. Nobody, not me, not my parents, knew what was inside it. The judge opened it and read it aloud. In her own handwriting, Evelyn had documented everything. The pressure my mother had put on her after her hip surgery, the specific dates of the meetings where Marissa tried to get power of attorney, the conversations Evelyn had walked away from feeling frightened of her own daughter. And then, near the end, one line that seemed to reach across the courtroom and settle the entire case before the judge even finished speaking. My granddaughter did not change my mind. She reminded me why I had already made it. I watched my mother's face as those words were read. I watched her understand in real time that her own mother had anticipated this exact moment years before it happened and had left behind proof strong enough to stop her cold. Under cross-examination, my attorney asked my mother a simple question. Did she believe Claire owed her something for being raised? My mother's careful composure finally cracked. "Of course she owed us," she snapped. "We sacrificed everything for that girl." When my attorney asked why I should have had to repay sacrifices that any parent chooses to make for their child, my mother said the words that ended everything. "We shouldn't have to ask. She should have known." In that one sentence, in front of a judge and a courtroom full of strangers, my mother finally said out loud what I had felt my entire childhood, but never had the words for. I had never been raised as a daughter. I had been raised as a debt she expected me to pay back, with interest, for the rest of my life. The judge ruled that Evelyn had been fully competent, that the trust had been properly and lawfully created, and that there was no credible evidence I had manipulated her in any way. The fake family preservation agreement was declared worthless. My parents' entire challenge was dismissed. The inheritance remained mine, exactly as my grandmother had intended. Outside the courthouse, my mother approached me one last time. I thought, for half a second, she might finally apologize. Instead, she looked at me and said, "After everything we gave you." I finally understood that sentence would never change, no matter what I said back to her. "I believe you sacrificed for me," I told her, "but sacrifice doesn't give you ownership of me." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back to see how she reacted. A few weeks later, a letter arrived from my father. In it, he finally admitted what he had known all along. He knew my mother had pushed me out at 18. He knew she had tried for years to take control of Evelyn's finances. He knew what was happening to me was wrong, and he had been too afraid of my mother to ever say so out loud. I didn't forgive him right away. I wrote back one line. I believe you, but believing you doesn't undo it. It wasn't peace, but it was the closest thing to honesty my father had ever offered me, and for now, that was enough. Instead of using Evelyn's inheritance simply to build a comfortable life for myself, I started the Evelyn Bennett Caregiver Fund. It helps family caregivers across the Savannah area cover the costs that quietly break people down. Respite care, transportation, groceries during hard months, medical equipment nobody budgeted for. This was exactly what Evelyn would have wanted her money to become. Not a fortune sitting in an account, but a hand reaching out to people who are exhausted and forgotten, the way she once reached out to me. Not long after that, Gloria introduced me to a 19-year-old nursing student named Harper Collins, whose parents had just thrown her out of their house. I recognized the look on her face the second I saw her. The fear, the shame, the quiet certainty she had nowhere left to go. I took the old blue key off my keychain and placed it in her hand. "What do I owe you?" she asked, echoing a question I had asked Evelyn 100 times as a kid. I smiled at her the way my grandmother used to smile at me. "Nothing," I said. "As long as there's a door, you have a place behind it." These days, I sometimes stop by Evelyn's old kitchen table and watch Harper study there, surrounded by the same cedar and cinnamon smell I grew up loving. The blue key isn't on my keychain anymore. It found where it was supposed to be, and I finally understand what my grandmother spent her whole life trying to teach me. Real love doesn't hand you a bill, it hands you a key. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your own family who loved you without ever asking for anything back, or if it gave you the courage to stop paying a debt that was never really yours, I want you to subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales. This channel exists for people like Claire, and maybe for people like you, who needed to hear that walking away from what hurts you isn't betrayal, it's survival. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you after hearing my story, it's this. You are not required to earn the love that real family gives freely, and you are never too late to become the person who hands someone else a key instead of a bill. The significant educational and moral value in the story centers on the difference between conditional love and unconditional love, and how that difference shapes a person's entire sense of self-worth. Claire's parents represent a transactional model of family, where affection is tracked, measured, and expected to be repaid, which teaches children that they must earn belonging rather than simply receive it. Evelyn represents the opposite, showing that real love asks for nothing in return and instead multiplies by being passed forward to others. The story also illustrates the importance of documentation, boundaries, and preparation when protecting vulnerable family members from financial exploitation, a genuine and increasingly common issue among aging adults. Evelyn's careful planning with her attorney reflects real, practical wisdom about safeguarding one's wishes against manipulation, even from one's own children. Finally, the story teaches viewers that justice does not always mean revenge. Claire never sets out to punish her parents. She simply refuses to be controlled, tells the truth, and redirects her inheritance toward helping others in similar situations. That choice transforms her story into one of bitterness into one of legacy, reminding viewers that the most powerful response to being treated like a debt is to become, for someone else, a debt-free door.